Hi, this is Mike making my video to add to my collection. Today is 5/13/2025 and it's 5:22 p.m. Uh, I'm just talking about the state of affairs that I'm in and how I look at things. I think it's spot on as far as how things go in this world. Uh, basically. Um, you know, uh, I think things should be a lot simpler in life. Uh, People should be modest. Uh, I'm kind of irritated that's the way things are going in this world, but then again, I do think that think that things will correct themselves. So, I've been talking about manifestation quite a bit, and I do think that it's incredible, as far as your spiritual mind goes, your subconscious mind, and of course your creative mind, basically, and of course your rational mind. So it's a little bit of both. It's a combination of the two. When you work with them together, you have the wise mind. You don't get impulsive, and you don't act on impulse, and then you don't get too calculating with everything. Sometimes you just make a decision fast, and you think about things slowly. So I have manifestation with things that have taken place that were years in the making, decades. And some of these things took place that were 40 years in the making. So anyhow, it's like you got the SMART plan: specific, measurable, attainable, uh, relative, or rational, and time sensitive. And those types of things, you can have your, let's say, 1 month goal, your 3 month goal, or your 1 year goal, or 5 year plan, and maybe even a 10 year plan. And of course, it goes all the way up to 40 years and 50 years. So, sometimes things that I've decided to do have taken decades to accomplish. And I'm at a place right now where I've got a decent little room. It's not a big room. It's kind of spendy on the rent, but it's decent. It's clean and it's nice. Uh, it just got remodeled before I moved in, and it serves my purposes. And I don't necessarily um, need to be in a big house. I don't think that's the right way to go when it's one person. So anyhow, I got food, shelter, clothing, education, transportation, and of course, love for myself, love for the world, and love for other people. Compassionate and strong. So anyway, I've done all that, and it's just like, I got a couple of vehicles, and I've got a decent little room, and I got nice things. And you always say, well, what's wealth? And say it's really relative. You could give one guy a pack of cigarettes and he's content, or you could give one guy, an entire assembly plant or whatever, and maybe he's not even content with that. So sometimes you got to figure, when a person is always seeking after more and more and more, there's always something inside of themselves that needs to be addressed, an empty void. And usually once that empty void takes place and it gets filled, your desires get taken away from you, and then you increase your wealth. So simple is very complex in many ways. And I think people are putting too much emphasis on um, artificial intelligence. They're putting too much emphasis on some of these cars that they're on the road. They're kind of cheap and disposable. In artificial intelligence, knowledge is actually subjective, and of course, money is just paper, so I spend it as fast as I get it. I always find something to spend it on. I always go shopping online before I get paid. It's kind of like Maslow. And so anyhow, that's how that works. And I've got some decent little things. I'm actually pretty appreciative. Being content is actually the way it works with how things work, and being content with what you got, and you know, being content with things, and appreciating the things you do have. And with that being said, there's a lot of people that are just, they keep trying to fill that empty void that they have in their soul, and no amount of money can truly fix it. And that's basically the hedonistic treadmill. And you keep filling that void with things, whatever, sex, and you know experiences and whatnot. But the things that this world has to offer, the carnal mind, and what it has to offer, are basically limited. And then of course the subjective mind, the subconscious mind, not the subjective mind, but the subconscious mind, has things that it can give you that will blow you away. But either way you look at it, it's the spirit or the flesh. And if you think about it, if you're too dependent on one or the other, you end up getting to the point where you can destroy yourself. And your subconscious mind or your conscious mind, if you don't bring that forth, if you don't have that within you, if you don't have the will to survive and get through things within you, you'll never make it. And anyhow, that's really all there is to that. But pride is something you should not have too much of. And of course there's that. And eye candy. You should appreciate things, but like you get a flower, a lily, you leave it alone. You don't pick it, and you don't pick flowers. And what I'm getting at is, you shouldn't take a woman to lock her in your house and try to move way out in the country where she can't do anything. That's really a woman's prerogative, is to socialize and be with people. And you treat that person just like you would yourself. And so that's really how that works. So you get what you give, and what comes around goes around. Uh, so I'm just content with things. I got some laptops, and I've got these. I've been wanting a pair of these for a very long time. For probably the better part of probably 30 years, 40 years. And I held a pair in my hand, and I really liked them. And I didn't have the money to buy them at the time. And years later, 30 years later, I found a pair, and they were only $50. So it's just like, that's kind of what it is, basically, ownership and having things that you always wanted but you couldn't afford. And sooner or later they come along. Time and chance happens to everybody. And like I say, wealth is relative. The woman in the well, she had 2 cents, and she gave that, and she gave everything she had. Or a guy that has $1 million, he might give $10,000, but it's all relative. And really, if you think about it, like Jesus gave everything, including his own life. He laid it down for his own people. The ones that he chose to be with, or they chose to be with him. And that's the greatest gift you can give to anybody, is laying down your life. So there's that. But I do think he's a little off on a few things, but I think for the most part he made the best decisions. And Apostle Paul as well. You can call me religious. I'm not, but I understand it like Scripture. I'm more of a scientist by heart, but honestly, I do like Scripture. I met God, talked to him. He had white hair, white robe, long white beard, big blue eyes, and he was huge. Had supper with him and talked to him, and he was in the flesh. So that was one of the greatest experiences I ever had, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. So it also talks about how your wealth is irrevocable. talks about your mind, your spiritual wealth, and it also talks about your body. But even those pass away, and they roll up like a scroll, and then all your possessions roll up like a scroll. Friends and family and everything. Sooner or later, people forget who you were. But I think some of your wealth is irrevocable. Like I got a mental illness that creates. I have incredible creativity, and basically, it's my wealth. It's actually a disability, but it's my ability. I turned my disability into my ability. So anyway, I don't chase after women and wine, useless knowledge. And like they got cell phones now. They got all the apps that can replace every bit of electronics in your house. And of course, you can still find cars that are pretty cheap, and they're gas cars or whatever, and you could do that. And of course, you could modify your lifestyle to live, be frugal about everything. Tighten your belt, basically, and do a lot of things yourself, and then basically you can save so much money. So I like that. I appreciate that, and I have an appreciation for certain things. I'm not really going to get into all this psychobabble, about the supernatural and stuff like that. I mean, everything is basically a miracle, even childbirth. Uh, even the fact that you can get up and stand and walk outside is a miracle. So I mean, there's things that are even grander than that. But ultimately, it's all basically an illusion. It's a powerful delusion that your mind creates, and the universe and your mind are actually the same thing. And it's like the universe has just as many galaxies as you have neurons in your head. So I mean, it's basically the same thing, and we're all basically one mind. We just do different things. Some people are part of the mind, some people are part of the body. Some people are thinkers, white collar workers, and some people are blue collar workers. And they have common pottery, and they have, porcelain and all that fancy stuff that's for show. It's really ultimately the same thing. I've talked to the richest man in the world, and he's just a normal guy like me. It's crazy, but I think all that stuff is basically, he accomplished great things. It's just, ultimately, uh, he's got that responsibility, and he took it on. And of course, he gets to see the people and know the people and do whatever. But I seen the steps that he took to create the cars he did, and he's actually a normal guy. He and I talk every day. So even God was a simple guy. He's a farmer, and that was his forte. But even this guy, he's not much different than me. The only difference is really I'm frugal. I had a lot of wealth. I had $50 million at one time, but it dissipated. It got stolen from me and stuff like that. But I'm not too worried about it. And I've lost all kinds of beautiful cars. But eventually, what comes around goes around, and things come around, like these goggles. I got these for $50, and I love them. And even my computer is priceless. So it's like some people just have their alternative or their goals. They have tunnel vision, and sometimes they overlook things that are pretty decent. That work fine. You get a cheap car that runs just great, and sometimes these cheap cars last forever. They want a big bloated one, and for 100,000 it makes no sense. So anyway, I like that. I like cheap stuff. I like Chinese products. I think that was the greatest thing that ever was. It's just they're trying to eliminate that, and I hope it comes back. So anyhow, that's all I really have to say, and that's just basically a little bit of an excerpt of what I wanted to talk about today.